Dorothy, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. For those of you logging in on Facebook, feel free to post your questions during the program, and we will address them as we reach the end. Go ahead, Dorothy, or you can take it away.
Okay, hello. I am Dorothy King, and I am the chair of the Education Committee here at Historic Harrisburg Association. I am delighted to welcome you to our fourth Monday program. Tonight, you will hear a presentation about historic houses and buildings that we feel should be preserved. But first, let me mention to you or share with you information about our February and March programs. In February, we will feature Ryan Unger, who is with the Harrisburg Chamber of Commerce. He's going to be discussing the history of the chamber, along with a connection to Myra Dock and the City Beautiful movement. In March, we will have a program entitled The Bridges She Built. This program will center on women who were involved in bridge design and bridge building. Our panelists will be Veronica Martin with PennDOT and Janice Links, who's with the Friends of the Shefford Bridge. This evening's program will highlight the preservation priorities we have selected this year and will be presented by Sarah Sweeney, who is the chair of our Preservation Priorities Committee. Following the presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers, and this will be facilitated by board member Shane Gallagher. Now, David Morrison, our executive director, will introduce our speaker. Thank you for your kind attention. Take it away, David.
Thank you, Dorothy. And I want to thank you and our entire education committee for the great work that you do throughout the year, planning programs like this, which we have on the fourth Monday of most months, but many other things too: tours, walking tours, bus tours, educational programming. It's really one of the most important things we do. Our equally important committee is our Preservation Committee, and that's chaired by Sarah Sweeney. Sarah is a registered architect and has extensive experience in the arena of historic preservation. Her committee has spent the last couple months updating our preservation priorities list to present them for the first time tonight. They will then be presented to the Historic Harrisburg Board of Directors for adoption at their February meeting. So this has become an important agenda item on our education calendar now for the last several years to present the new priorities in January. So we're very excited with what you're going to be seeing tonight. And I want to thank Sarah and her committee for all the work that they did going into this. Thank all our audience for listening. And with that, Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Dorothy. And thanks to all of you who have joined this evening. Also, I want to give a huge thank you to the members of the Preservation Committee. We've all worked really hard this year, and we're looking forward to presenting HHA's 2022 preservation priorities. And I just want to ask one question of Ashley, who is spearheading the presentation portion. I am not able to see it, and that might be because of the split platform. So is the 2022 preservation priorities? Wonderful, great, thank you. So with that, we can go to the next slide. For those of you who are with us last year, you may recall we implemented changes to the way, and I'm actually going to turn off my camera to focus on presentation. For those of you who are with us last year, you may recall we implemented changes to the way the priorities are categorized and presented. We've made a minor tweak to that format this year, and we dropped this change of status category. The committee agreed that this could become confusing from year to year, and instead priorities will be listed in order of the year they became a priority and may rotate into our top 5, or better yet, into the preservation successes category. Regardless, a priority is a priority until it's preserved or gone. Next slide. Before continuing with the presentation, I just wanted to summarize the HHPC charter, which is full text being on the slide. And actually, if you could go back to the previous slide. Perfect. So one of the committee's key roles is HHA's think tank for both Historic Harrisburg and for the Community Historic Preservation Fund. The committee also helps shape advocacy positions and also helps coordinate the preservation awards each year. So with that, let's get going. And if you go to the next slide. So first is our top 5 priorities for 2022. 4 of the 5 are the same as last year, and Camp Curtin United Methodist Church has actually shifted to the watch list, and the Beetleman House is the new kid on the block, so to speak. Next slide. So the Beetleman House, this Market Street landmark is at the gateway to Allison Hill and is also located in the Mount Pleasant Historic District. It was built in 1906 for the prominent attorney and political leader, Edward E. Beetleman. He served in the State House from 1904 to 1911, in the State Senate from 1912 to 1918, and was also elected Lieutenant Governor from 1919 to 1922. In 1937, the building was converted to professional offices and apartments, and the property is currently vacant and in severe disrepair deterioration due to water intrusion over the years from open and damaged windows and possible partial collapse of the roof structure, and if not that, just from a very deteriorated roof. It is also on the city's demolition list, having been placed there in 2018. Due to its location within a National Register historic district, this property is eligible for federal rehabilitation tax credits. And HHA is hopeful that with placement on the top 5 list, we can bring attention to this majestic building before it's too late. Next slide. The Bosley House. This historic building remains on our top 5 list. It is one of the earliest structures still standing in Harrisburg and dates from the federal period. It's rumored to be a hewn log structure, yet ironically, it is protected under a skin of aluminum siding. It sits in a key location along 2nd Street, nestled amongst restaurants, retail, and it is close to the Capitol complex. HHA is in steady contact with the owner and would love to see the property utilized along this active corridor. Next slide. William Penn High School. Again, another repeat from last year. Located at 3rd and Division Streets, the high school sits on a grand old campus overlooking the Italian Lake. The school was designed by Charles Howard Lloyd and opened in 1926. It closed permanently after the 2010-2011 school year. Currently for sale, it has been eyed by developers, but one key impediment to an adaptive reuse of this property, which HHA has received feedback on, is the high cost for rehabilitating the structure and updating mechanical, plumbing, and electrical services, especially given current construction costs. Some developers are also more interested in the land and would be more likely to demolish most or all of the structure. The school is a key property in the history of the city, and it would make for an amazing adaptive reuse with the right buyer and owner. Additionally, sensitive reuse of the open space surrounding the school is as important as the future of the building. HHA hopes to continue to call attention to and raise awareness of this stunning building and property. There is also a possible scenario where the Harrisburg School District might repurpose the school, as reported in Penn Live and the Berg in late 2021. HHA will, of course, keep in touch with the district regarding this scenario. Next slide, please. Harrisburg State Hospital. Located on Cameron Street across from the Farm Show complex, the State Hospital consists of a hilltop campus of historic buildings and scenic landscape and has been compared to an Ivy League college campus. It closed in 2006 and the property went on the market in 2017. In 2019, it was purchased by Dauphin County and is currently under an agreement of sale. The state was originally expected to be off-site in fall 2021, but now expects to remain in occupancy through 2023. Historic Harrisburg also published a 2014 white paper urging preservation of the historic campus portion, sensitive development of the Elmerton Avenue tracts, and preservation of open space around Asylum Run watershed and the Capitol area Greenbelt. We will continue, of course, to keep an eye on this a wonderful property as well. Next slide, please. Prospect Hill Cemetery Gatehouse. This Victorian-style gatehouse, which is located at 25th and Market Streets across from the Harrisburg High School, was acquired and moved from the Philadelphia Centennial 1876 Exposition grounds. Over the years, it has lost some of its architectural features, having been refaced with a stone veneer and some new windows, some not matching the original size and configuration. It is a beautifully proportioned structure regardless, and a close cousin of the gatehouse at an entrance to the Philadelphia Zoo. Its location at the abrupt end of Market Street makes it a target for car accidents, and it was severely damaged by car collision in 2020. HHA is in contact with the current owner and also hopes to work with the city on a solution that would garner the structure some protection from future car damage. Next slide, please. So now we move to our watch list, which encompasses all of the properties that we are keeping a watchful eye on. So next slide, please. The first few of the properties are new, and the first one here is the old Highway Patrol Building. This structure is located at 21st and Hearst Streets and was dedicated in 1931 by Governor Gifford Pinchot. It became Troop A with a supply unit and training school for the State Highway Patrol. It is currently vacant and in deteriorating condition and was brought to the committee's attention by one of HHA's board members. We will look further into its status this year and hope to provide an update mid-year. Next slide. The Market Street Bridge is also new. This concrete arch stone-faced bridge is the third bridge to be built in this location, and it forms the eastern span of the full bridge connecting City Island and Harrisburg. It was designed by engineers Ralph Majeski and Frank and Masters and architect Fall Philippe Cray, and was constructed between 1926 to 28. In 1988, it was listed in the National Register of Historic Places and further documented by the Historic American Engineering Record in 1997. This eastern span creates a monumental entrance to Harrisburg from the West Shore. Ornamentation and historical markers on the bridge indicate the traditional importance of a river crossing in Harrisburg's history. Like most of the country's infrastructure, the bridge is aged and in need of maintenance. It is slated for rehabilitation by PennDOT in 2024. PennDOT is currently performing preliminary engineering and environmental studies and recently presented 3 options for public consideration and comment in Warmleysburg. Public input will also be accepted by PennDOT through February 11th, 2022. And I believe all of this information is available through PennDOT's website, as is a way to submit any public comment. HHA applauds PennDOT for its plan to restore this historic bridge and hopes that in the process, original design features are maintained. We will continue to monitor progress as the design progresses. As a side note, Majeski and Cray also worked together on the Ben Franklin Bridge in Philadelphia. Majeski, again, was chief engineer and Paul Cray was the architect. And if anybody has not been across that bridge, it's worth a trip into Philadelphia, just as a side note. I did a report on it in grad school, and it's really an amazing bridge. Next slide, please. Jackson Square. Jackson Square is located in the 7th Ward and is of key import in Harrisburg's rich African-American cultural and economic history of the early 20th century. HHA has decided to highlight the full square because of its importance, and in recent years have seen the successful rehabilitation of Swallow Mansion, sadly, the collapse of Jackson House last year. However, the future looks bright. The owner of Jackson House plans to rebuild, and Bethel Village, an affordable housing project for seniors, is in the works on the site over farther to the right. The hope is the combination of these projects will further activate Jackson Square. Next slide, please. This is our last new property on our watch list for this year. This diner is a perfect example of a classic diner, and it is threatened by the impending I-83 widening. The I-83 bridge over the Susquehanna is slated to be widened, and construction is expected to begin in 2024. The East Shore Diner is located in the direct path of the construction. And if you did not see, there was an excellent article in the December issue of the Berg regarding the diner. Next slide, please. The 19th Street Armory. This has been a status since last year. It is a historic National Guard armory built in 1938. It's a 2-story stucco-coated concrete building in the modern style, which was very popular from 1925 through the 1940s. Art Deco, as an example, is one of the modern styles. It has a modified T-plan with administrative rooms and a garage on the first floor and a drill hall above. An L-shaped addition dates to 1974, and it was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1991. Currently, there is an adaptive reuse rehab plan in progress, but we know little beyond this at the moment. Next slide, please. At Dixon University Center. As some of you may recall, or many of you may recall, this was put up for sale last year by the state system of higher education. The 6.5-acre campus sits on the river and has served various functions over the years. The state system purchased the property in 1991 and made substantial renovations to the historic buildings that for decades housed the Harrisburg Academy, which is one of the nation's oldest private non-public schools. During the Depression and World War II, much of the property was sold to the U.S. War Department to use as a training center for the military's Air Intelligence Service. The property has also been used as a temporary home for HAC, and while its Wildwood campus was being built. When the property went up for sale, we placed the campus on our priorities list. In fall 2021, the state accepted an offer from the Jewish Federation Center, and the sale is awaiting finalization. Next slide, please. Cumberland Valley Railroad Bridge. The current bridge, a concrete arch structure, was built in 1916. It has great potential as a recreational link greenway between the east and west shores, or perhaps could be repurposed if a commuter line was ever to come to fruition. At present, however, and to our knowledge, status as shown remains the same, unknown. Next slide, please. The Milestone Inn. To our knowledge, this property is still for sale, and status has remained the same for several years now. Next slide, please. The Historic Peace Church. The Peace Church was named to the National Register of Historic Places in 1972. It is located at Trindle and St. John's Church Roads in Hampton Township, so it is one of the HHA's West Shore properties. Excuse me. The church is currently owned by the state and is maintained by Friends of Peace Church, a small group of volunteers. As of this presentation, Friends of Peace Church are continuing with programming, and the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission remains the owners. Next slide, please. The Sheepford Road Bridge. We have this update from the West Shore Historical Society. And recently, at the encouragement of the West Shore Historical Society in 2021, both York and Cumberland counties agreed to apply to PennDOT for funding to restore the bridge for pedestrian and bicycle use. And we will, of course, continue to update as we find out more information. Next slide, please. The historic Cameron Mansion, located at the corner of Front and State Streets, is still for sale. It was built in 1863 and is a Victorian era house blending elements of various styles of the era: Italianate, Second Empire, and Gothic Revival. It is truly an architecturally stunning structure and has been beautifully maintained, and it contains much of its original woodwork, fireplaces, and built-in structures. Next slide, please. The Riverside Firehouse. The Harrisburg Redevelopment Authority owns Tract 1 at 3201 North 4th Street, and is awaiting deed transfer from the city for Tract 2, 3203 North Front Street. And after deed consolidation, the redevelopment authority will issue an RFP to interested developers. So we are very hopeful to see this really lovely little firehouse be renovated and perhaps be on the preservation successes list soon. Next slide, please. Gerber's Department Store. Also known as the Carpets and Draperies Building, the building is currently being rehabilitated into a small multi-use residential and commercial building. We are hopeful that this property may advance to the preservation successes next year. Next slide, please. Elks Theater. Opened in October 1911, the Elks Building, including the Elks Theater, seen here in the image to the right, is a 700-seat theater, and it is currently owned by the Borough of Middletown. To our knowledge, status remains unchanged, and the theater is still for sale and vacant and in threat of deterioration. Next slide, please. Built in 1937 in the central Allison Hill industrial area, the bottling works is really an iconic structure evoking the famous Coca-Cola trademark embossed in concrete in its spandrel friezes. The building continues to remain vacant and available and could be an excellent development opportunity on the South 17th Street corridor. Next slide, please. The Brinzer Mansion, built just prior to 1914, is a Mediterranean-styled stone edifice located along North Front Street. We are concerned about possible threatening of demolition for surface parking. The front yard area has been stoned at this point for parking, and at present, we are trying to find out the status on the mansion itself. But the mansion, along with other historic and architecturally significant mansions on North Front Street, continues to define the street's legacy and character. Next slide, please. The Bishop Bridge, another beautiful truss-style bridge located on the West Shore. It is located on Bishop Road, southwest of Bowmansdale on the Cumberland, York County line. The bridge, which has been determined eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places, is an early Pratt-style truss bridge with a nice decorative railing. The bridge was designed and built by the Wrought Iron Bridge Company of Ohio in 1898. The counties wished to sell the bridge because of its limited capacity for vehicular travel. The buyer would be responsible to disassemble and move the bridge. And to our knowledge, status remains the same, for sale. Next slide, please. Lemoyne Middle School. The former Lemoyne Middle School later the former Lemoyne High School, later converted as the Lemoyne Middle School, was constructed in 1925 and is a landmark amidst later commercial development along Market Street. The building's facade has Italianate and Romanesque features with an abundant amount of corbelled patterned brickwork as a major design element. The school closed in 2013 and was vacant through 2019 when it was purchased. It is currently undergoing rehabilitation into an apartment building and will include amenities that are also available to the public. I did take a picture going by it yesterday, which I completely forgot to put in the presentation, but there is construction fencing around it, and it has been under construction now for, I think it really kind of started in fall of 2020 after some remediation had been done. Next slide, please. The First United Methodist Church on Bozz Street. Built in 1881 with Gothic revival and Italianate architectural features, the church is nestled in the heart of the Midtown National Register Historic District. It is also slated multi-family conversion, and actually is, if we still have the information correctly, is owned by Dilks Properties of Harrisburg. And Dilks Properties is also involved with the Lemoyne Middle School renovation as well. Close contact with Derek Dilks and hope we can get some updates on the status of the Bozz Street Church in the next few months as well. Next slide, please. St. Paul's Church in Shipoke. The historic church is located at 118 Vine Street and has been vacant for several years and is on the market for sale. The Gothic Revival edifice was built in 1898 and retains many of its original architectural features and character of a turn-of-the-century Harrisburg church. The property can be renovated and returned to an operational religious facility or potentially transformed into a creative adaptive reuse project. Next slide, please. Bishop McDevitt High School. This building was completed in 1930, and the main building is designed with these landmark twin towers of neo-Gothic design. It was designed by Harrisburg architect Bernard E. Starr. The high school closed in 2013 when the new facility opened. The school was leased last year to The Bridge, an organization which plans to redevelop the structure into an eco-village. Status of this venture is unknown at this time. And again, we are trying to find out what we can about that. Next slide, please. After concerns last year with a lot of the issues with churches, losing congregation and members and so forth, we are happy to report that the congregation here and the programs are active. There is still a need for ongoing maintenance and upgrades, but the church is on better footing this year, and we hope it continues to strengthen. Next slide, please. The Harrisburg History Project. This project consists of 113 outdoor displays describing and illustrating historic buildings, neighborhoods, and landmarks of local, state, and national importance. The original markers were installed a number of years ago, and many of the exhibits have been damaged, removed, or just deteriorated due to wear and tear. Historic Harrisburg and the Midtown Action Council received a gaming grant from the Dauphin County Commissioners to upgrade the system. At this point, several markers have been replaced, and the overall project continues forward. Next slide, please. The Zembo Shrine Center. This magnificent building was completed in 1930 as the home to Harrisburg's Masonic organizations. Its Moorish revival architecture was designed by noted Harrisburg architect Charles Howard Lloyd. The Zembo Center is a major landmark in Harrisburg, particularly in the Uptown area. Previously, it was for sale, but a new potentate was recently installed who was eager to bring new energy to the facility, and the shrine was taken off the market. Next slide, please. Paxton Firehouse. This firehouse was designed by William Lynch Murray and built around 1937. So this also, like the 19th Street Armory, is in the modern style, particularly here, Art Deco. The building is located within the city's municipal historic district, but falls just outside the National Register district. In late 2014, the fire station was closed after mutual agreement between city officials and the firemen's union was reached. The Paxton Fire Company has initiated plans to sell the property. Given its prominent location at the city's southern gateway and its unaltered historic exterior, the firehouse continues to be for sale and offers attractive possibilities for adaptive reuse. Next slide, please. Camp Curtin Memorial Mitchell United Methodist Church, which was on our top 5 last year. Located at 2221 North 6th Street, this century-old landmark church is an anchor in the Uptown neighborhood and is also listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The church has important ties to Harrisburg's Civil War heritage and was designated a memorial to all Civil War soldiers, at which time the name was changed to Camp Curtin Memorial Methodist Episcopal Church. A large allegorical painting depicting Christ appearing to a dying soldier dressed in both blue and gray still adorns the sanctuary wall. The church was purchased in 2021 by Chris and Erica Bryce, residents of Harrisburg and local developers, and they are looking into possible adaptive and sensitive reuses for the church. HHA remains a close relationship with the Bryces and will post updates to plans as they become available. Next slide, please. The former Brotherhood Relief and Compensation Building. Originally, it was designed originally in 1923 to be a 10-story building. The project was halted following financial difficulties, however. After sitting vacant for several years, a revised and scaled back 2-story redesign was done by the Philadelphia architectural firm Ritter and Shea, and the building was completed in 1932. The structure later became known as the Hudson Building in 1979. It was purchased by a developer, and it is now known as the Atlas, 1923. And he had started work, or the development company had started work on the property. Things seemed to halt for a while, but that was in large part because of issues getting permits with the city. And it wasn't a fault of anybody. It just turned out to be, things got lost in the mix with COVID and such. But he recently received permits from the city to begin work on the building's rehabilitation. And if you're interested in finding out further information on this, there's a great website, theatlas1923.com. Next slide, please. The Walnut Street Bridge. This is another truss bridge built by the Phoenix Bridge Company in 1890. It is the oldest bridge on the 400-mile Susquehanna River at this point. Since flooding in 1996 destroyed sections of the western span, it no longer connects to the West Shore. The conversion to pedestrian use gave the bridge a new purpose, and it is used by over 1 million visitors, tourists, and residents annually. The 2,801 foot span is one of the longest pedestrian bridges in the world as well. The bridge is listed in the National Register of Historic Places and is also recognized as a historic civil engineering landmark. In 2012, Lighten Up Harrisburg relit the Walnut Street Bridge, and this organization continues to raise funds to explore LED lighting opportunities. Other efforts supported by HHA seek to replace the missing western span so that the full potential of this recreational, tourism, and transportation resource can be realized. Next slide, please. The Broad Street Market. This is America's oldest continuously operating farmers market, and it is an anchor of the Midtown Market District. This 150-year-old market originally served soldiers stationed at Camp Curtin during the Civil War as well. The market complex is currently owned by the city of Harrisburg and managed by the nonprofit Broad Street Market Alliance. It was, in poor condition and not well utilized, but over the years it has become a thriving market and boasts a vibrant array of vendors, including fresh produce, specialties, and prepared foods. And I know anyone who's been there is, it's just such a great place. Its iconic sign did suffer damage in a storm last year when we had some high winds, and if repairs are expected to occur this year, now that the building permit has been acquired. Next slide, please. So the Historic Harrisburg Resource Center, our home. We have a master plan grant funded, and there is work underway. Just getting things done. So the building is slowly but surely coming back to life. Next slide, please. So the Jackson House, of course, as most of you know, this structure collapsed in 2021 when it was starting to go under rehabilitation efforts. And the developer or the owner does have a plan in motion to rebuild it in the original form. So we are again have a close relationship with Matt Long, and we will continue to monitor updates as they become available. So that concludes our watch list portion. Now we will go into the losses and successes. Can you go to the next slide, please? This is a reporting of any losses over the past year. And, we try to preserve our history, but sometimes portions of the history are just physically lost. So these losses and the stories will be archived and accessible on our website. So next slide, please. No losses. We had no losses this year, so we were really happy about that. That's hopefully that will be the case year to year. Anyway, now we can move on to the next slide. Preservation successes. So same thing, a reporting of the successes of the past year, and they will also be archived and accessible on the website. Next slide. So our first success is the Derry Street Church. The Derry Street United Methodist Church is a Gothic revival style church building completed in 1908. The church is located within the Mount Pleasant National Register Historic District. It serves as a vital neighborhood and community center for the surrounding South Allison Hill area. And because of its importance to the community, concern arose after closures of some Methodist churches in Harrisburg began in 2020. Thankfully, Derry Street Church was purchased by the Anglican Church of the Pentecost in 2021, and with an active congregation, the church is doing well. We are pleased to see it join our Preservation Wins category and hope it remains there for many years to come. Next slide, please. Grace United Methodist Church, which was built between 1873 and 1878, has a rich history and can actually be said to have saved Harrisburg from losing its status as the capital of Pennsylvania. So we have some good information on that on our website. But yes, this church saved the capital from being moved from Harrisburg, our great city, to Philadelphia. Further, the church is located within a National Register Historic District. The congregation here continues to be active and the church is doing well. And we are equally pleased to see this building join our Preservation Wins category, and of course, hope it remains there for many years to come. Next slide, please. So that concludes our Preservation Priorities Program presentation for 2022. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will, of course, entertain any questions or comments that any of you have. And also, if anybody has information that we might find useful for any of these properties that we're not aware of, please, we're always excited to receive input from our members and the community at large.
Thank you, Sarah. For those of you tuning in, if you do have a question, please feel free to post it in the comments to the video, and we will read it out to the presenters today. I think the first question, and this can go to Sarah or David, that I always like to ask is, we went through information on a lot of properties tonight. So for anyone that this is their first time seeing our preservation priorities, what is the overall kind of barometer? Would we say things are trending positive, neutral, negative? Just trying to give that context to anyone who it's their first time seeing this list.
I'll take a crack at that. I think the trend has definitely been moving in a positive direction the last couple of years. More and more sectors of the economy see historic preservation as a positive tool, whether it be the development community, the real estate community, the institutional and nonprofit community, residential. Everybody is seeing that, understanding that the greenest building is the one that's already been built. And so restoring and preserving these wonderful old landmarks not only saves them as a wonderful piece of history, but it also means that all that construction material doesn't have to go to a landfill, and all kinds of new material isn't needed to build an entirely new building. And so I think we're seeing a lot of positive signals that what we have believed for close to 50 years is being embraced by more and more decision makers and people throughout the community and the region.
And I would add to that, I also see a positive trend. I think too, with the pandemic, it's changed the way we live and work, and people can, live in a place that's not close to their, where they are working, because you can work remotely now. And, I don't know if we have recent information, but, there has been, a certain amount of influx of people into the area. And hopefully, the downtown area will continue to, thrive and revive, and, more developers will, as David said, see these older properties as potential adaptive reuse projects. The firm I work with does multifamily housing, and there are projects we do that are adaptive reuse. So I've seen all types of buildings that you think couldn't become multifamily.
And Sarah, that's actually a good segue into the next question. With, everyone's hearing about the increase in construction costs. Has that been deterring any investment in this adaptive reuse, or people just kind of extending their timeline? Can you talk with your background as an architect, as to what you're seeing in that space?
Yeah, I think it's really a crapshoot. I know with the company I'm with, I work with a firm that is actually like a tiny little division of the Michaels organization, which is a large national developer. And, what we're seeing in some respects is just value engineering down to the bare bones. And even with that, projects are still over budget. I think a lot of these projects, some of the projects are projects that just, they need to be built because of funding issues, especially if they're affordable. But yeah, I would think that, especially for a smaller developer, that it can be a deterrent. And I think some of the buildings, like in Harrisburg, I think we tend to, correct me if I'm wrong, David, I think we tend to see smaller developers, and to get that kind of capital with the way construction costs are so high right now and fluctuating, and supply chain issues, it's difficult. And I know that's like some companies, like there's a shingle roofing company that we do a lot of work with. I know that they know that the Michaels organization is a large organization, and they'll put aside a certain amount of supply for their larger companies. So it becomes harder for, smaller developers, to get that. So that's my theory. I think it'd be really interesting to talk to some of the developers that we know. And that might be a great, Dorothy, maybe that's a great presentation. Monday night education down the road.
So we did have another question just come in asking if a community theme, for example, Camp Curtin or the National Civil War Museum, helps with the preservation of landmarks.
David, I'm going to have you take that one. I don't know.
Could you repeat that,
Sure.
Shane?
Yep. Does a community theme help in the preservation of landmarks essential to the community, like Camp Curtin and the National Civil War Museum? So I think they're asking for ones that kind of get themed and related to the history of the area and really connect with the community. Does that tend to help propagate, preservation of landmarks then?
I think it does, because these organizations, these history organizations, are enlightening the general public as to why these old buildings and landmarks are important, why they have important history. And certainly Camp Curtin as a Civil War destination, and the Camp Curtin Church as a specific landmark that symbolizes the old Camp Curtin. There's a lot of Civil War history interest, and that translates into interest in that neighborhood. And I think we're beginning to see, and we're going to see more interest in the Camp Curtin neighborhood in the years and decades to come, as what I predict could very possibly be the next Midtown. I think there are a lot of great housing stock there. There's a couple of fantastic major projects, such as the Atlas project in that area. and and having the institutional neighbors and organizations involved in a positive way, I think that does rub off onto the community at large.
Shane?
Yes, Dorothy, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, let me just jump in too. So absolutely, I want to echo what David said. I'm not seeing myself on camera, so I'm guessing I'm on camera. I'm not sure, but
We can
I
see
can
you.
see you.
you can see me. Okay, that's all that counts. All right. So what I'm thinking is that we connect with the community connects with us. It's really all about a shared passion. The community has a sense of, when we go into communities, they have a sense of how history feels to them. And we have a sense of how we can preserve that history. So I like to think that we work together with the shared passion to hold on to structures, culture, beliefs, traditions. So I kind of think that answers that kind of echoes what David said, that we really, really do want to present to the community their sense of history and our preservation. So it kind of really takes passion and talent to combine, to come together.
All right, thank
Agreed.
you, everyone. Next question relates to, so we have, a diverse number of items on, our preservation list. We have bridges, we have archways, we have the History Marker Project. Can you talk a little bit about how those different items, kind of come together to make kind of a community? So going a bit off the last question, just a little bit about how, these different items come on, because for someone that's new to seeing it, they might not originally expect to see a bridge on our list. So maybe just a little flavor around that.
I think, the way you look at preservation, it's also about place. And there's so many elements that make up place. It's not just the buildings. It's also about the infrastructure that serves the buildings and also gets the people that live and work in the areas to the buildings, to their homes. So infrastructure is a huge part of that. And, so I think we're trying to preserve or look at the whole place of Harrisburg, of the East Shore and the West Shore, if that kind of makes sense. I might be talking a little of like an ethereal architect right now, I don't know, but that's kind of how I see it. Bridges especially are critical. It's the easiest way to get across a river. Otherwise you have to take ferry, and bridges are some of the most beautiful engineered structures, that we have, that we as people use every day. David, you want to riff on that further?
I think you said it very well, Sarah. There are so many different elements that make up our sense of place, and right down to things like the outdoor history exhibits, signage, monuments in Riverfront Park, most of which are enjoying good stewardship and preservation. They're an important part of our physical history and heritage. So yes, it's so much more than just buildings, and the buildings don't have to be ancient to be important. Many of the things that Sarah presented tonight are from the middle of the 20th century, but you saw that they're amazing architecture that isn't being made these days. Modern architecture will be appreciated in future decades as classical examples of the early 21st century, for example. And so nothing is too new to warrant our care and our attention.
So we have another question around the financial realities that come into play with historic preservation. And they're curious that, with COVID and everything, what is the current status of funding sources? Have we seen them increase or decrease? And particularly with the infrastructure bill passed by the federal government, does there tend generally to be options to use that money for, historic preservation, or does that tend to have too many strings attached to be used in that way?
I think
Oh, no.
some of the Build Back Better money and other money flowing from the federal government will kind of trickle down, particularly with highways and bridges and public infrastructure, water systems, sidewalks, mobility, alternate forms of transportation. And when you look at the value of investing in all those things, there's sort of a ricochet benefit to the neighborhoods that adjoin those things. So while a homeowner might not immediately see an influx of cash to do a renovation project, they're going to see other kinds of benefits. And I think investors are also motivated by positive factors around them. So I think that is all in all a positive thing.
That's
Also,
a really good question. I'd like to kind of look into that further myself. I don't know. I think David's, you're on the right track with that. But yeah, that would be really interesting to dig further into that.
All right, let me see if any more questions came in. So I don't see any more. So I think I will ask one final question and we'll just make it a little more fun.
Hey Shane,
So-
I'm so sorry to interrupt. One
ahead.
just came in. It says, I think Lorna, who's watching, just said, could the National Civil War Museum coordinate with the Camp Curtin Mitchell Church and the other Civil War buildings around the area? I assume for preservation purposes. I think they're asking if they can join those, like a coalition of Civil War era monuments and things on the preservation list, that they can do something together.
I'll take a crack at that. I think the answer is definitely yes. There have been efforts to coordinate among all of the Civil War interests in the capital region, not just in Harrisburg. The National Civil War Museum convened a group that for a number of years was putting on a weekend called Civil War Days in Harrisburg. And that's a project where all of the different groups collaborate, and much more collaboration would produce much greater results. I think it's only limited by the operating strength and ability of the various organizations. But whoever asked that question, you're definitely barking up the right tree. And a lot of this kind of coordination. There was a project that Jeb Stewart worked on a few years ago called Civil War Trails, and that was intended to tie all of these things together. Individual locations, they're not all that exciting, but you put it together and you've got a heck of a lot of critical mass about that part of American history right here in Harrisburg. So and there's a new director at the Civil War Museum who just came from an organization in Virginia, and who brings a very astute perspective on some of the current questions about the heritage of slavery, and that's so important that be part of the story and part of the educational experience. So I think we're going to see more in this whole area.
All right, excellent. Well, we are about at the top of the hour, so in keeping with schedule, we want to thank everyone for tuning in and remind you that it does take a village, or in this case, a city, to make preservation happen. And while not all of us can save an entire structure, when you do your next renovation, you can be very thoughtful in saving your own little piece of the city for future generations. And We will be posting all of this out to our website. It is available now if you click on preservation priorities, and feel free to share it with a neighbor who wasn't able to make it this evening. Again, thank you for joining in and have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much,
Sam.
everyone.
Great.